I am Jimmy Pete, and I'm so happy to be announcing for our very first meeting of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for the City of El Segundo. I'll call out the names of the committee members and ask you to just register by saying here, present or here. Lauren Abercrombie.
Here.
Kenneth Chancey.
Here.
Kelsey Chittick. You would weigh in, Kelsey.
I think you're muted.
Sorry, here.
Natasha Lee.
Mute.
Unmute yourself and check in there, Natasha, if you would.
Oh, here. Sorry, my audio is lagging a little bit.
Shad McFadden.
Here.
Avery Smith.
Here.
Christina Vasquez Fajardo.
Here. Fajardo.
I'm sorry. And Christopher Vienna.
Here.
Stephen Wood.
Here.
And that's our team. Glad to see you folks. Are there public communications, Becky?
No, there's nobody here in the chambers to speak, and we did not receive any emails.
All right, thank you so much, Jackie. I'd like to give the virtual floor to Scott Mitnick for a welcome. Scott there he is.
On hand. Hey,
Hi, Scott.
all right. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is a significant day for El Segundo. So I'd like to just echo the comments that Jimmy made. So thank you for your patience and your persistence, and congratulations on being selected by City Council. It was a long process, and I think it speaks volumes for how special El Segundo is that there was such interest to serve on this committee, an unusually high number of applicants. So well done. It was really difficult for City Council, I know, to go through because and then select those that were selected. I mean, just literally everybody who applied could have been put on this and done a great job. So on behalf of the city family, welcome. And we really look forward, when I say we, I'm talking on behalf of the City Council, on behalf of the city's executive staff and our 300 plus employees. We're looking forward to your input, your insight, and the outcomes that will come from all this. And do know as we go through this process, we'll get to know each other. As staff to the organization, we are staff to the committee. So we're here to help you be successful, to help you with research, to help you with questions, to help you with process. And we're going to warn you right now, because this is local government, it can be bureaucratic. There are legal requirements and rules and transparency and disclosure. And there'll be times when you think that we are poking at you or just making your life difficult. That's not the case. It's about you're dealing with inclusion, right? So we have to make sure we're adhering to the state's laws and rules and so on. So we'll try our best not to be bureaucratic. So we look at the agenda here. You do have to go through a process to talk about the meeting schedule. How often do you want to meet? Once a month, more frequently, less frequently. They'll talk about the chair and the vice chair. You do need to select a chair and a vice chair to help run the meetings. And we have bylaws that we'll go over. And then we'll talk about the study topics that the council has laid out for you, what those are. And then Jimmy has some videos and some topics to go over. So today is pretty much a logistical, procedural meeting. We're going to do some introductions, right? Is that next, Jimmy? Yes. So we'll do some introductions and we'll go from there. So Jimmy, I'll turn it back to you, but we'll introduce ourselves, committee, but we'd like you to introduce yourselves first, and then we'll let you know who we are as your staff. So Jimmy, I'm handing it back to you.
All right, thank you, Scott. Well, let's start with the first person I see at the top of the screen. Kenneth, take it away.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for having me. My name is Kenneth Chancey. I'm a 8-year resident of the city of El Segundo. I moved here when I was at school at Loyola Marymount University my sophomore year and have been here ever since. Currently a policy director at National Foster Youth Institute, or a small nonprofit founded by Congressmember Karen Bass, connecting current and former foster youth to decision makers to help design policy that'll impact foster youth. So thank you for having me.
Thanks so much. And Kenneth did that perfectly. Just a little bit about what you do, your connection to El Segundo. Thank you so much, Kenneth. And so let's go with Lauren.
Hi, everybody. Lauren Abercrombie here. I've lived in El Segundo for 2 years. I'm a Southern California native. I work locally for Google in sales there, but have been moonlighting in a small capacity as a DEI ambassador within my organization, just sharing and helping to facilitate DEI type conversations and topics. So I'm really, really excited to join this group. Fun fact about me, I'm 9 months pregnant, about to welcome our first child. So wasn't sure if I would be able to make this meeting when we originally scheduled it. My due date is November 1st, but I'm here. And yeah, baby's not here yet. So I'm very excited to be here.
Thanks, Lauren. Glad you made it. All right. We'll stay with the committee and then introduce the other folks after that. So let's go with you, Shad.
David. Hey guys, Shad McFadden. I've been in El Segundo a little over 12 years. Currently also involved with the AYSO program. So I've probably got to know more parents through the last 6-7 years of coaching, reffing, and being a board member through that organization than anything else I've done. So it's been a really nice slice of, everyone's on the same team on the soccer field. Well, not the same team, but everyone's on the same team as their kids' team out there. So I think it's a good cross section of how you get to know your neighbors. Everyone's out there rooting for the kids. It's always been, pretty good, except for the hatred going at the coaches. But, we try and limit that. So excited to be here as part of this group.
Thank you, Shad. Coach Woody.
Yes. Thank you very much, everybody, for the opportunity to serve with you. I'm really excited how there seems to be almost like everybody has a focus on youth and young people, and has a heart for it. You can tell by your applications. So that's pretty cool. I grew up in one of the smallest towns in upstate New York that would win more championships than anybody else after the Onondaga Indians Native Americans started going to our high school. So I've grown up with a very unique situation. They were the descendants of the founding fathers. That's where you'll get my lacrosse. I snuck my lacrosse sticks into the back here. My wife didn't see me bring them in, so they won't be there maybe the next time. But they gave us our 3 branches of government. They gave us voting, and so my heart is with the game that I played and was able to go to West Point, become a lacrosse player there, captain of the team, All-American, a couple USA teams. And I've been coaching probably over 80 teams in El Segundo, starting with Little League and AYSO. I had 4 kids and coached all of them. And one time ended up coaching 4 AYSO teams at once and helping out the league with some issues that came up when I was assisting. And at any rate, it's a great city, and my brag in a sense for lacrosse and how the creators game has helped change this area. I'm not sure how many people are positive of the city, but we have started, we were responsible for helping to start the inner city lacrosse programs and for the high schools. So yeah, there's a lot more we can do through youth sports here, all of us together, in all these baseball, soccer, basketball, everything. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Woody. To hear from you. All right, Natasha.
Hi, my name is Natasha Lee, and I'm a student at El Segundo High School, and I've grown up my entire life at El Segundo. Fun fact, Woody was also He's actually my coach for a pretty long time for lacrosse, so it's very nice to see a familiar face here. I guess I've always really been involved in like racial relations. I've always been really interested in this type of things, and with the recent increase in the Black Lives Matter movement recently, I've been getting a lot more involved in local politics, especially with all the recent protests that have occurred in El Segundo. So it's honestly really interesting and really hopeful for me to see that this group was formed. And I honestly didn't even think that I would be selected for the first round of interviews when I first joined. So it's very nice and it's very nice to see how open-minded El Segundo is and how welcoming this committee is and how truly interested it is in like viewing every single person's perspective, no matter someone's age, race, sexual orientation, all these different factors, because it is about diversity and inclusion. So I think that really speaks major points.
Thank you, Natasha. Good to hear from you. And Christina.
My name is Christina. I am from Inglewood, California. Our family moved to El Segundo in 2004, so I've been here for about 16 years. I also work for Right Management as an enrollment consultant, and Right Management is also located in El Segundo.
Christina, excuse me. Can everyone hear okay?
Oh, it's pretty tough.
I think you're going in and out a little, Christina. Maybe you can get closer to your mic.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Give it a try.
Okay, so hi, my name is Christina. I am a transplant from Inglewood, California, and we moved here in 2004. So I've been a resident here for about 16 years. I have a daughter in the 10th grade. I have an 8th grader who's involved in baseball and soccer, which I keep hearing in this call. I also have a senior in college. And so I really have a heart for diversity and work for Right Management, which is also located in El Segundo. And I'm really just a proud first generation Mexican American. And I'm really humbled and excited to be here and serve with you all. I have such a passion for this topic, and it is definitely a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Christina. It was difficult. There's a muffled sound. I'm wondering if there's something you can do with audio. I'm not sure what you could do, but it's difficult to hear you, difficult to follow you. So you'll be able to follow us if we can't follow you, but just wanted you to know. All right, thank you. All right, Avery.
So first, so happy to be here with all of you guys. I'm an 18-year resident of El Segundo. Long before the grays here on the beard were present. But it's good to be here. And I think, my connection to El Segundo, twofold. One is through Little League, El Segundo Little League. I've been a coach. I have 3 kids. 2 of them have gone through El Segundo Little League. So I have that connection. And then the other is I've been given the title as the unofficial city weatherman. So if you know about El Segundo weather on Facebook, that's my page, my site. And so I'm kind of a weather nut and love to follow the 75-degree and mild Southern California weather. But very good to be here, and I think we can do really amazing things. What pays the bills is I'm the president of an insurance company, and that's in Santa Monica, and we're a national dental and health insurance agency. And so, Lauren, we spend a lot of money with Google, so if you can help me out, that would be great. But good to be here and very excited.
Thank you, Avery. Good to hear from you. Kelsey.
Hi, everybody. Kelsey Chittick. Glad to be here. Nice to see a bunch of faces that I know and many that I don't. I've been in El Segundo for about 16 years. I have a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old. And I'm changing careers right now, but for most of my career, I was spent in corporate recruiting, building teams for corporations that were diverse and different, and just teaching corporations the importance of having people that look and think differently on teams and in communities to get the best out of their workforce. So this feels like what we're trying to do here. And I've been waiting for this for many, many, many years. So we're really excited that everybody listened and everybody got involved, and that we are finally at this step, which I love El Segundo more than anything. And I think we have a ton of work to do.
Thank you, Kelsey. And Christabel.
Yes. Hi, everyone. So professionally, I work for Common Pool, and it's a philanthropic organization. So we work with governments and foundations and very wealthy individuals to launch philanthropic campaigns to kind of gather more innovative ideas to solve global problems. So some interesting clients that I've had include the County of LA. I've worked with their homelessness division. I'm currently launching a project with the state of New York to do clean transportation initiatives. And recently we launched a $90 million program with Kellogg Foundation for their 90th anniversary that's around racial equity. So that's Racial Equity 2030, if you want to check that one out. And so I feel like, a lot of this work that I, hope will hopefully inform each other. I'm really, really excited to get to know all of you and to work with all of you. Hopefully we can do that in person sometime soon. I've lived in El Segundo for just over 6 years, probably almost 7 years now. I am the president of El Segundo Little League. It'll be my 5th year on the board there, so my 2nd year as president. So you can imagine, thank you, Avery. So as you can imagine, I've got to interact with many different families and deal with many different issues and departments here in town. I'm also, a mom. I have a 15-year-old at the high school, Miles Salazar, and then my 4th grader, Lennon Salazar, at the elementary school. And they play lacrosse and surf and baseball. They're into everything. And I think all of us, we just try and get involved as much as possible with whatever's going in town. So we love El Segundo, fell in love with it as soon as we moved here. I'm really, really proud and honored to have a committee like this get started.
Thank you, Christabel. Good to hear from you. Let's move to having the staff introduce themselves. Can I hand that over to you, Barbara?
Sure. Thank you, Jimmy. Scott, do you want to begin with introducing yourself, and then I'll go last?
I'll go last. So,
oh, you'll go last. Okay, you're the boss.
I'll go last. So Barbara, why don't you start, and then we'll just go around the clock as we see everybody.
Okay. Well, I've met most of you. I'm Barbara Voss. I'm the Deputy City Manager, helping Scott with daily operations, running the communications program and the economic development program for the city, and helped work with Jimmy to assemble this great group. So thank you all for your volunteer time and for being involved, and I look forward to working with you.
Okay, Aricia.
Hello, hi, my name is Aricia Hester. I'm the Recreation Superintendent. I am so happy that this is happening. So thank you very much for going through the process and being a part of this group. I can't say thank you enough. And thank you to Jimmy for that grueling process that you had to take everyone through. We appreciate you. Just a little bit about me. I was born in St. Louis, Missouri. Lived most of my life in Northern California in the Bay Area. I've actually lived in Los Angeles for just 3 years. So I'm fairly new here still, but enjoying it all the better. I have a 22-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old daughter. So you can imagine the span and the different hats I have to put on between the two of them. And that's all about me. Again, thank you for being here.
Okay.
Yeah, you are the liaison, is that right?
Yes, I forgot that part. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah, hey, committee, we should have explained that. Those are the staff that are here today are going to be involved with this committee one way or another. So that's why we're here. So looking next, I see Police Chief Bill Whalen. He's the best dressed person today.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, it's good to see some of you again. A few of us have met before, others haven't, and I'm looking forward to getting to know you over the course of this committee's lifetime. I want to thank you for your service. There's many ways that you can serve, and what this is one of those. And my hat's always off to somebody who puts service above self. So thank you very much for doing that. Jimmy, well done. You had a very, very robust group of applicants, all of whom were highly qualified to do this. And just listening to the perspectives and the balance that we seem to have here, I think you really hit the mark on selecting this committee. So well done with that, sir. A little bit about me. Well, my profession is pretty obvious, I suppose, between the uniform, the tie, and the introduction. But I've been in law enforcement a little over 30 years. I've been your police chief for about 3.5 years. Before that, I was with the city of Irvine for about 18. And before that, with the city of Garden Grove for almost 10 years. I've worked, well, with the exception of motors, I have worked pretty much every assignment there is to work, or I either worked it or I supervised it or managed it in some way, shape, or form. So I've had a great career. I don't regret any part of it. It's been fantastic. I am excited about this committee. You know, I believe we have a great police department. I really, truly do. But I also know that we're not perfect. And I think that we can learn from this and we can grow from this. And look, you have a broad mandate. Your committee exists for many reasons, and with the primary underpinning of making our community a better place. But I would be naive to think that the police department isn't going to be a major focus of what you're doing, just based on what we see locally, nationally, and what's kind of come to a head right now. So your El Segundo Police Department is excited that you are here. We look forward to it. We look forward to working with you and explaining what we do. I don't believe any of you have been to our Community Police Academy. Am I mistaken on that? Okay. I've been speaking with Jimmy, and we're gonna figure out ways to really open up our four walls to you that we can do in this kind of COVID world that we live in. But when I give the opening introduction to the Community Police Academy, I always tell the audience that I really hope that some of you aren't our supporters, because if all we are supporters in the front door that look to see what we have to do, we're not really making progress. So I hope that there are people that when we have our Community Police Academy that will challenge us, that will ask questions, that will ask why. Why is it that you do that? Why do you do that? Why do you wear this particular thing? We're going to figure out a way, and I'm still working with the city manager and with Jimmy, your facilitator, to really give you a very thorough and in-depth overview of the police department. I want to do it in person. I think that's more impactful, but you know, we may be stuck with doing it in this virtual realm. We'll have to wait and see on that. But you will get, you're going to get the truth from me. You're going to get the honest assessment of where we're at, where we want to go, and things, you know, that I believe right now we can improve upon. But again, like I said, looking forward to hearing your viewpoint. So I will ask of this committee the same thing that I ask of my officers, and that is seek first to understand. I think if we approach it, and Jimmy, I don't want to steal any of your thunder. I know you're going to have lots of great things to say and so forth, but we're in a world where we're really being driven by emotion quite a bit. And for us to be successful, for us to be meaningful and impactful, I think we have to try to kind of get through the emotion a little bit and really drill down on what are some fundamental problems that we're seeing. How can we together arrive at some solutions? So I've probably already spoken too much. That's it for me in a nutshell. I guess on a personal note, I have 2 kids. My oldest is in flight training in the Air Force. That's pretty exciting. And my youngest is graduating college this December, actually. And he's a food and hospitality major. So what better major could you think of to come of age in a pandemic, right? So we'll see whatever job he can land in a few months from now. But that's me, guys. And again, looking forward to working with all of you.
All right. Thank you, Chief Wayland. David King, our Assistant City Attorney. Would like to introduce-
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David King. I'm the Assistant City Attorney. I've been working in El Segundo for about 6 years. The City Attorney, Mark Hensley, has been working for El Segundo for over 25 years. So we've been in El Segundo for a long time. We're private outside attorneys that serve as the City Attorney's office. It's common for the Attorney's office to sit in on appointed bodies. So that's why I'm here, just to help you all navigate in your important committee work, and also to help answer any legal or procedural questions that you may have. So thank you again for your service, and I look forward to working with all of you.
Okay, I thought we had some other staff. Is Lauren Daniels on this call? She's our HR manager. She's going to be providing support to this group when you have questions about the internal workings of the city. She's not here at the moment. Anybody else from the city family here? Nope. Okay, I guess that leaves me, and then we'll let Jimmy tell you a little bit about his background. So I have, as city manager, if you're not familiar with that role, it's sort of like the city CEO. I have the what I would say is the most challenging and most rewarding job of all in local government. You see the big picture. You work for the city council. You oversee the day-to-day operations, and you have your finger on the pulse of what's happening. At times, it can be very challenging. I'm very proud of the staff that just introduced themselves to you here. We're here to help you. By way of background, so I've been at this a long time, like the police chief, a little more than 3 decades. I actually was born right down the road at Daniel Freeman Hospital. It's not there anymore. But my first few years, I lived in Inglewood, and then due to a job relocation, our family ended up moving to La Habra. You just keep driving down Imperial Highway, you go to just about where it ends, inland. That's where I grew up, and it was a great place to grow up. I went to university at Cal State Fullerton. I attended the University of Bristol in England for a year. I got a scholarship to do political philosophy. So I learned quite a bit about diversity and what it was like to be in a different country with a different perspective at a young age. And then for graduate school, I went to Syracuse University in upstate New York, probably not too far away from where Coach Woody is from. And they had, when I was a student there, great lacrosse teams. They won 2 national championships, and it was so exciting to go into a lacrosse game at the Carrier Dome and see 30,000 people wearing orange shirts for a sport I had no clue about. I had no clue what I was watching, but that was an interesting experience. So I've been in local government for over 30 years. I've been in Northern California, Southern California, was city manager for a long time in Thousand Oaks and Ventura County. I was a county administrator in Northern California, Sutter County, and I did a little bit of work in the private sector as a banker with Stiefel in downtown LA. And now I'm back to being a city manager here in El Segundo. So I'm very happy to be here. It's a great city, a lot of challenges. As I mentioned earlier, we do welcome this discussion of diversity. And if Jimmy didn't tell you through the interview process, what makes El Segundo unique is this committee was formed as a proactive measure. This committee was not formed like a number of DEI committees in California in reaction to something that happened, or a court order, or a settlement. We didn't have something that blew up here in our community. We're being proactive due to what's going on in society. The council has totally embraced this issue, and we want to learn how to be better at what we do. So I think that's really cool. I feel like it's something special. All of us should be proud of that. And you're going to find that the city's very receptive and very open. And we're going to try our best. I've told the team here, we are not here to be defensive. We are not here to be defenders of the past. We're not here to explain or justify. We're here to answer your questions, and we're hoping you'll make us better and smarter on these issues. We are proud of our diversity today, but we know we could do better.
Scott?
That's it for my comments. Okay.
Scott, can I just interrupt? I think we forgot about Jackie Day introducing herself. She's actually the one that set all of this stuff.
Well, I said, hey, is there anybody else there, Jackie? So I looked right over you.
That's okay.
Thanks so much.
She's one of our more shy employees. Go ahead, Jackie.
Hi, I'm Jackie Day. I'm the Senior Administrative Specialist, and I'm very excited to be taking minutes for this committee. I've been looking forward to it. I have lived in El Segundo for 25 years. Recently just moved back to Torrance, to my hometown. This is my daughter's hometown, El Segundo, and she's been went through the whole school system here. And she's currently a veterinarian, so yay, El Segundo schools. So I'm just happy to be here, and anything I can do for any of you, just let me know. Thank you so much.
Jackie,
Okay.
thanks for all you're doing backstage to have the show go on.
Okay, with that, we're going to turn it to Jimmy so you guys could figure out his background, and then we'll go back to the agenda. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Scott. Okay, well, I'll say a little bit about how I got here. Most of my career has been some form of community building work. I started working in San Francisco Boys Home while I was still in college. I was a teenager when I started working with teenagers. I moved from working in a group home scenario to working with foster kids, especially focused my level of expertise on youth that were troubled. And I spent about 20 years mostly in the city of San Francisco, largely also in Oakland, East Bay, doing work that is about supporting families to heal and thrive. I had a very terrific move out of that kind of strict social work scenario into working with families dealing with life-threatening illness and loss. And that was a kind of scenario by which I ended up really beginning a focus in working with diversity and inclusion, working with a variety of families at crisis. I'm part of a consortium called D2K that's been meeting since 1996, a consortium of diversity professionals. We meet in a conference forum yearly, and I get a lot of mentorship through people who are diversity officer at St. Mary's College, diversity commissioner at Lawrence Livermore Labs, people who work in a variety of scenarios doing some diversity, equity, and inclusion work. My connection to the local area, let's see, I moved here from Texas when I was about 10 years old, lived in near the Leimert Park area, and I went to school at St. Bernard's High School, not far down the road from El Segundo. As a matter of fact, we got to borrow your field last year as our football field was being renovated. So I'm a Viking forever. And El Segundo was part of my stomping grounds when I was in my impetuous youth. Suffice it to say, I didn't stomp around too much right in El Segundo. But that's an area where I grew up. Moved to the Bay Area for college, and I have returned to Southern California about 4 years ago. Just did a few years running a homeless shelter in Ventura County, and have rekindled, relaunched my consulting business and moved more formally now into doing this work again, which is dear to my heart. My background is doing a lot of this with counties in the Bay Area, developing their capacity to be broadly available and competent with a variety of populations and service. So glad to be here. Thank you, folks. Okay. Now we've got a bit of an administrative part of our agenda. I'm not exactly sure. I know that one of the things we want to talk about is our scheduling. Let's see, is Barbara or Scott there? Oh, Barbara. In my conversation with Scott, we talked about, I thought ideal for us to meet bi-monthly in building a team, but you told me, Scott, it might be difficult to manage that with all the protocol that it has to go through. Is this just the time we're going to discuss that?
Yes. Yeah, the meeting schedule, right. Depends how much research has to take place and so on. So monthly would be typical for a committee like this, but if there's time is of the essence, it could be faster, but the ability to do research and get it done and get it agendized and all that, doing it within a 2-week time frame would be challenging, depending on the level of research, of course.
Yeah, it really just depends on what this group wants to do. But typically, yeah, like Scott said, it's like the third Wednesday or the third Thursday of the month, or you kind of set a fixed date so that you can just block it on your calendar and always be able to attend. And we try not to switch that around too much so that everybody can be there.
So I'm thinking of two things. One is of the kind of ramping up process, kind of the team building process where we'll spend a little training time together. And then there's a kind of second phase where you do your regular meeting as a committee, convene to share your research, take on a certain subject, make a recommendation. So that seems like two different phases. Does that make sense to you, Barbara and Scott?
It does, yes.
Okay. So I've got a recommendation. I'll check with the group to see what they think, but I've got a recommendation that we try to do November and December in that we seek to do a bi-weekly thing and then switch to monthly by the start of the year, if that's possible. If you got any, what do you think, Scott or Barbara? Any disagreement with that?
Could you restate that, please?
I've got an idea that might be useful for us to do the first 2 months in every 2 weeks. We wouldn't be as burdened to do a whole lot of research and come back with a lot of conclusive material. That the value of those meetings would have team building value, that we look at a few things together, grapple for a little while, and really kind of build ourselves as a team, getting to know each other. And then at the first of the year, switch to a monthly format.
That's very logical. That makes sense.
Okay.
As long as everybody's calendar can accommodate that, sure.
Okay.
Do you need a motion to that effect, Jimmy? Or how do we do that?
Yes. Well, I'm thinking that that's what to do is, first of all, to see if, because we don't have to do the specific scheduling, I would send out an email. But if everyone's agreeable to meeting twice a month through the end of this year.
So what we can do, Jimmy, is we can establish a calendar based on the input of this group, and then put it on the agenda of approve diversity, equity, inclusion committee calendar. It'll be attached, and then you could do the motion in the second and vote.
All right, thank you.
So
thanks for
sounds like, well, go ahead, Jimmy.
No, go ahead, Barbara.
Oh.
I need guidance.
I guess you could open it up for discussion as to whether anybody has any opposition to doing bi-weekly meetings until the end of December, and then monthly January through, so that we can go as far as, a year.
Very good. All right, very good. Does anyone have any opposition or concern about that?
I would just flag that with Thanksgiving and Christmas holiday seasons coming up, that may interrupt with the schedule if we proceed with the 2 a month.
Yeah, I agree. It could be dicey.
Well, committee, we can work around that. I mean, because the first few are logistical. So you can have the intent to meet twice a month. You run into Thanksgiving or Christmas and you just work around it.
If I may, yeah, I think that it shows a little more sense of urgency, and we all feel that. So, and that would also show other people that we share in that feeling. And the other thing is, I would it give us maybe an opportunity to make a plea to our legal team to help us out with our youth sports. We have kids that are aching right now in soccer. Only 2 people allowed to pass, no triangle drills, even with spacing, people are not touching the ball. I'm just talking about kicking. I'm talking same thing with baseball, except anyway.
What do you feel? Allow me to interrupt. If we could stay on task, though, what we're doing now is just kind of checking to see how we feel about the scheduling.
Sure. If I may, I just say I would like to make a recommendation to the city earlier, sooner than later, about these issues that are preventing our kids from playing sports. Lacrosse, people can pick it up without touching the ball ever. So there, you know, that's a big issue for our town and our kids.
Avery?
Yeah, I was just going to add. I think Jimmy, you're on point with the team building, because obviously not everybody in the community has accepted and embraced this committee like the people here, and so I think that we're really it's going to be very important for us to be connected in that fashion, and so I'm all on board with the twice monthly format. I think once we go into next year, I travel over 100,000 miles a year for work. So logistically, we can talk about that as we get into next year if we're ever traveling again. But certainly, I think that the twice a month format definitely makes sense right now.
And for the rest of the group, it will be on the agenda for the next meeting. So if you think between now and then, you can voice your opinions and thoughts when you actually vote on the item.
Thanks, Barbara. Another thing that we can table for the next meeting, but I'd like for folks to be thinking about it, is that we need to nominate a chair and a vice chair. That'll be an important process. And so if you would simmer on that for a bit and make recommendations, and we can make a vote on that. I'm thinking in the beginning of our next meeting.
Jimmy, I have a question for you. Do we have a list of responsibilities for the chair versus the vice chair?
Very good question. I think we must have it, but I don't know it. There's Scott.
I don't know if we have the written responsibilities for El Segundo committees, commissions, and boards. If there are, we'll provide those. But basically, the chair just runs the meetings. So we'll have to make sure we provide some training for you how to do that. Staff will help you with the first couple meetings, and then you'll figure it out, and it'll make sense. So we'll get that. Sorry for not having that at this point in time, but we'll make sure you have that.
There would be information about the role of the chair in the bylaws, and we'll get there. And we'll send over some sample bylaws to take a look at, but more interaction with Aracia as a staff liaison, more interaction with Jimmy about what's going to be on the agenda, what the group will be discussing, kind of just a leadership role within the group to keep the group, focused and engaged.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Initiate discussion, shall we, Barbara, of bylaws? Is there something to go into there?
I'm going to defer to our attorney, David King, to talk about the bylaws and just anything else related to, I know you all had your orientation with the city clerk's office, but just the legal aspects of serving on a city council appointed committee.
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. Again, good afternoon, everyone. Just very briefly, I just want to make you all aware that California is a very regulated state. And because the city council created this body, you are an appointed body of the city council. And so in that role, you become public officials. And there are certain meeting requirements that must be met for a majority of the body. And so just very practically speaking, what that means is if there's more than half of you that are voting members of the body, you cannot talk about DEI issues outside of the meeting as a majority of the group. The idea is that the public, because this is a public body, the public has a right to observe and to know all of the discussions that are going on about this committee, because again, you are a public body, you are all public officials. So it is fine for two of you to talk about DEI committee matters outside of a meeting, but you cannot discuss as a majority of the body outside of a noticed public meeting. That includes emails and text messages and Google Docs, any type of communication, whether it's written or verbal. If it's about the DEI committee, any of the issues that are discussed, any decisions that are being made, you cannot talk about that without violating state law. And so I hate to be the bearer of bad news. Public agencies have much more rules about committee work than private organizations. And that is just one of the pros and cons of public service, is that there's higher expectations about transparency. If you think about it, what we're really concerned about is public officials making decisions behind closed doors. So the spirit of the law, the intent of the law, is that all decisions and all discussions about these very important issues that all of you are so passionate about, all of that is taking place in public. Normally in pre-pandemic times, that would be in the city council chambers or at City Hall. But because we're on Zoom, we're all meeting remotely, but the same rules still apply. It still has to be noticed to the public. Public has a right to know what's going to be discussed. And to Jimmy's point earlier, it's also very important that we stay on topic with the agenda items. So as far as the role of the chair and the vice chair, they help create agendas and come up with topics that will be discussed on the agendas. And if it's not on a noticed agenda, then the committee cannot talk about that during its meeting, right? So we keep the agenda topics fairly broad. So there's some leeway, but if it's not on the agenda, then really the committee should not be talking about it. So the way you deal with that is that there's something you want to talk about, you can bring it up at a meeting and say at the next meeting, I would like the committee to talk about, such and such topic. And then you want to get consensus among the group that everyone agrees that that should be added to the agenda. And then if there's a consensus among the group to add that to the next agenda, then staff will make sure that it's on the next agenda, and then you can talk about it then. So it's just a couple, just to recap, please refrain from group discussions, a majority of the committee meeting, talking, discussing, texting, emailing outside of this group, unless it's a noticed public meeting. And if there's something you do want to talk about among the group, just make sure it's on a future agenda, and staff will make sure that it will be there. We appreciate your service. It does come with some legal requirements and some formality, and our office will help you navigate that. There's other issues as well, such as conflicts of interest, and there's lots of other regulations, but for the time being, I think that's a good way to start. You have our contact information. If you have any specific questions, happy to help you navigate that. And I'm happy to answer questions right now if you have any.
David, I have a quick question. I don't know if it's your area of expertise. I don't know how legal it is, but you mentioned how you would bring up something and then it would get on the agenda for the next meeting. Yeah. Is that generally something where that would go to a vote, or is it something where 5 people have items, all 5 go to the agenda? How does that usually work?
Yeah, let me see if I can answer this. So typically, because you're a one member of a multi-member body, typically the way it works is you need a consensus, you need a majority of the group to agree with you. The typical rule is that one member cannot put something on the agenda without at least a majority of the body agreeing to that. So again, I think the best way to handle that is if there's something that you want to bring up on a future agenda, just to bring it up at a meeting and ask the group, hey, I'd like to talk about this in the next meeting. Anyone have a problem with that? And if a majority of the group says yes, it doesn't have to be necessarily a vote. It can just be, unless there's any objection, we'll put it on the next agenda. But the idea is that you want to be working together. All of this is part of local government is working as a group. And you have to respect the fact that you are just one member of many, and not one member can dictate the agenda or the meetings. So hopefully that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah, thank you.
Great.
And I want to say Mr. or Mrs. Chair, but we don't have one yet. If I could just interject here for some clarity. When you're talking about items to be on the agenda, it has to be within the purview of the committee. Okay, so that's what staff will help ensure. So you're not, I don't know, making comments about what the speed limits on Grand Avenue should be or something like that. So, so between staff and the attorney, we'll make sure it's within your purview. And it's also within the legal jurisdictional responsibility of the city of El Segundo. So we can't weigh in on the purchasing practices in Lithuania or something like that. Believe me, crazy things happen or crazy ideas are suggested. And we like to just forewarn you now. David talked about the Brown Act, AB 1234, and these other transparency requirements. Please don't shoot the messenger when we're dealing with these issues. And we talked to you about the Brown Act, and we're asking you not to be communicating with each other separately on email and all that sort of thing. Or at least with the majority when you're the Brown Act issues. We're not being jerks. We're not trying to control you. We have legal obligations. We've had the training, and when things go sideways with the Brown Act, it can come back on us as your staff for not advising you or making you aware. So that's why you'll hear us do this. We don't like the technical aspects of the Brown Act. It's very hard for us because we don't want to be the rules. I don't know. We don't want to be difficult for you. So I'm just warning you, making you aware of that. We don't take any great pleasure in all that. So hopefully it won't be an issue, but if it is, just know we have legal requirements, and that's what we're trying to do. And I hope I don't ever have to talk about that again. All right, thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Scott. You know, one of the most interesting questions I had during this entire interview process is so many people wanted to know that this was substantive, that we weren't just checking a box, responding to an event, trying to ameliorate upsets or resolve a conflict. And I'm very excited to have had several conversations with the City of El Segundo City Council that this is for real. We have an initial review of 4 study topics presented to the City Council. I'm wondering, Jackie, could we put those on a screen? Do we have that ability, or should we read them out? I know I'm kind of surprising you.
Yeah, well, everyone should have the agenda.
Right.
So yeah, I think just reading them out, I didn't ask Jackie to have that ready to go or anything, and take a little shuffling.
Okay, so I'll just read those out, those 4 study topics.
Okay.
All right, thank you. So 1, public safety. A review of police department policies, practices, training, and level of diversity, etc. So that's 1. Next is citywide organization. A review of city policies, practices, training, and level of diversity. Right. 2, the community at large. A review of our demographic data, history, the trends that we are able to see, and in that area, level of diversity we've done this. Right? And then 4, the local economy, a review of private sector diversity policies, practices, any training needed, etc. So this is just announcing these areas of study. We're not going to go very far down the road in this area. I'm willing to hear what any folk, any questions or any comments. But these are the initial areas of study that we'll review, do some research, come back with ideas, data, recommendation, and discussion as a committee in these topics. Barbara or Scott, would you like to weigh in on these?
I would just add that these were just cut and pasted directly from the staff report of July 21st that Jackie sent out today, which established the DEI committee. So City Council voted and approved these recommended study topics. So this is just kind of a reminder of where we all started and what the recommendation was from council and what their wishes were in terms of studying what to study. And there's obviously a lot within this that you can further define and clarify.
Yeah, just if I could add to that is City Council's expectation and direction to all of you that you tackle these issues. They're very keen on getting the feedback on these topics and learning from them. So your task is to go through these items first, and then we go from there. And these items, by the way, came out of if you think about it and you're wondering, well, why these items? These were issues that were raised by the various protests and issues going on in society in general, as well as points made about El Segundo in particular. So public safety is police and fire, but it's primarily police. And we know that is the main issue in front of everybody. And this city is very receptive to going through all these issues, answering questions, and we're assisting you as you go through this and then make recommendations to City Council. Then after that would be taking a look at the organization as a whole. So just to be clear, so if you're wondering why we have some staff here and some not, so Chief Whalen and his team, they will be at your disposal as you go through the police department issues. And if you want to look at the fire department, we'll have Chief Donovan will be there for you. And then after that, you take a look at the broader organization, and you have Aricia here, and you'll have Lauren Daniels from HR to help with that. And then community at large. This is kind of interesting. We'll take a look at the demographics, and if we need to, we'll bring in an outside consultant expert. Take a look at the community as a whole. What is the makeup of the community? Look at the historical numbers. How have we changed? Where are we today? Where are we going? What does this mean? And your advice to council on being prepared for the future would be greatly appreciated in that area. And then, we have such a thriving local economy here. We're blessed by the corporations that are here, big ones, medium, small, lots of mom and pops, entrepreneurial types that are here. What are they doing? There's some cutting edge companies here. They probably are practicing cutting edge diversity training and techniques that we as a municipality can benefit from. I'll tell you, I'm somewhat selfish here. The council wants to learn from the community. I would like to learn about our organization, how we can make it better. So if we can look at some of these private companies in town and steal their ideas, we're very receptive. So that's the task. Those are the items in front of you. If you feel there are additional items dealing with the DEI world, we're happy to take a look at that. But City Council did want me to make sure that they are expecting these topics first, and then we go from there. That makes sense?
Yes. And is the idea that we would tackle these one by one, like focus on public safety first in our meetings and then advise and move on?
I would say so, but if you have, if you want to go a different approach you think is more effective, better use of your time, our time, we're flexible.
I think that sounds good to focus, because these, yeah, like you're saying, these are pretty meaty.
Yeah, they are, and I will tell you, not that many cities are doing this. I have some colleagues that are very nervous about what we're doing. So, but the police chief Whalen and I were very, very happy to open our books and talk to you. So,
please, other questions or comments before we move to the next phase, Avery?
Yeah, just a quick question, question quasi comment at the same time. So, in the past few months, the El Segundo for Black Lives group has, really made specific, I think they have 11 specific demands that they've made to the city council. I'm assuming, when we went through these four, buckets that, I think they fall in bucket number 3. But I just wanted to just understand, and I apologize, I live literally right next to the airport, so if you hear an airplane in the background. But I'm just trying to figure out, is that in our purview in regards to a recommendation based off of the demands that the specific group made to the council? Does that make sense?
It does, I think.
Absolutely, Avery. I think it's something that's in front of us that we'll have to, that we're called to respond to. But I will say there's a very important point I heard from candidates as well as city council members is that this DEI committee is going to be a bigger event than being driven about resolving immediate conflicts, that it will be called to resolve conflicts, but that we want to be a bigger engine than kind of a dual economy or kind of directed like a missile to go tackle this problem and go tackle that problem. That we want to flesh out the strength, breadth, experience of the committee so that it's much bigger than resolving an immediate conflict, and that it's potent in being able to respond to conflicts that show up. And of course, the most obvious one right now is some of the work connected to El Segundo for Black Lives. And so, there's a magnetic tug for us to pay attention to it, but it won't be the purpose of the committee to pay attention to that.
Jimmy, can I say something really quick? This might be helpful for all of you. A lot of the committee at the city creates subcommittees, and subcommittees are typically less than a majority of the body. So your group, I believe, has what, 9, if I remember correctly. Yeah, you have 9 members. So if you had a subcommittee of 4 or less, the subcommittee can meet as a group of 4 without violating the Brown Act. So a lot of other committees within the city find it very efficient to create subcommittees that can meet whenever they want to, and then they report back to the committee. So to go to Lauren's point, or Lauren's question earlier, you have the option of creating subcommittees of, again, less than a majority. So it'd be 4 or less. And that might help sort of speed up the process, because then you don't have to have noticed meetings under the Brown Act every time the group wants to talk about issues.
David, I think that's a really important point, because I was going to comment earlier about, if there are 9 of us in these 4 topics, which are pretty big, it seems like we want to go a couple of people in some different directions in the data gathering phase for sure. Instead of 9 of us sitting with the chief and his business, his group, we could maybe have a couple of these different groups, especially because there's so much information I think we have to gather to get started. So that might make a lot of sense for this group, I think.
Good idea.
And I'll add, a lot of the information will probably be helpful for each of the different areas. So I don't think we should wait to start some of these other things. I think we'll need it in order to tackle the others.
Avery, I wanted to make sure if I answered your question.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. I love the direction. I totally agree with that format. Absolutely.
I do have a question, and now that I know the rules, I guess you can bring up almost any time in the meeting and just say, we'd like to make this, anybody like to make this an agenda item. Like, my question to the committee is, where can we get our biggest bang for the buck, like today, yesterday? And really, it comes down to letting the kids play. And we're confined by state rules, or I understand from Arisha's team that, we're constrained. And what can we do to unconstrain our kids? Because minority kids are being prevented from coming into El Segundo. So I'd like to propose an agenda item saying, are there any other items besides these 4 that should be addressed immediately? And I would like to be on that committee.
I think the 4 are probably our first focus. I don't have anything outside of the 4. I think those seem to be, it seems like we got a lot to tackle without adding. That's just my personal take.
David, I'm sorry if I interrupted Jimmy. David, can you clarify, for subcommittees, they also have to be voted on as far as who is going to work on what, correct?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the subcommittee has to be created by the committee RCA. You're absolutely right. So, that would be a proposal that someone would raise, and a majority of the body would have to agree to that.
Coach Woody, I can hear that this is important for you. I'm going to ask us to table it for this point. I'll bring it up as a point of conversation in our next meeting, just to make sure that you get responded to. Despite it feeling like our agenda is a bit crowded, I want to at least respond to you so that whether we're going to go forward or not in considering.
And for the committee, if I can interject, remember I made a reference earlier to topics being within the purview of the committee. So that one maybe tangentially is connected, but that's a separate issue. And Coach, I'd be happy to work with you separately on that topic to see what, and Aracia and I can share with you what we have been doing in that area. So
thanks, Scott.
If you guys have questions about things outside your purview, let us know, and we'll be happy to talk to you in our respective roles.
I kind of wanted to add something. When you're talking about youth sports, I'm not sure, but I think that could kind of fall into the number 3, the community at large, that we could probably talk about in like further meetings, maybe not as in depth as some other policies or things we could be looking at, but it could definitely be something that's included. I'm not sure if it's the number 1 priority right now currently, but I think it's definitely something that can be reviewed in the future.
Thank you, Natasha. Yes.
Jimmy, if I may, it's almost like looking at the list. I totally agree that Natasha's hit it on the nose. In fact, you could look at each one of these items and you can find a place for youth sports in each one. Public safety, citywide organization, local community. So yeah, thank you, Natasha.
Okay. Any last comments before we go into the next phase of our meeting? Terrific. All right. Thank you. I'm very excited to present to you our first topic of discussion. In building this committee and building this team, there's a few things that'd be useful for us to begin to grapple with. I use that term. There's a number of issues, topics that are known, that are kind of in the field of play when you're doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And I'm going to present these topics as this is the landscape, this is the material we're going to cover, not all of them necessary as a truth or established like rocks are hard and water's wet, but they're concepts that's useful for us to be knowledgeable about, concepts that's useful to be able to have a discussion about with other folks. There's some teaching in there for us, some coaching in there for us. And so the first one we'll take on is having a discussion about the concept of structural racism. There is an opposing concept, so we're not going to present it like that's what's out there in the world. We're going to present it like these are some of the things that we'll need to talk about. And those things are not just specific to the city of El Segundo. These are issues that are rolling around in our national psyche, and that people are dealing with at all levels, all ages, many groups, all economic scenarios. And so I've got a nice little clip from Brown University. It's brought out in an academic scenario, but you'll see right away Professor Patricia Rose is real down on the earth. And so we'll listen to one clip and then discuss among ourselves the responses we have to that clip. And then we'll listen to a second clip after that. So here it comes.
Okay, so what is the How Structural Racism Works project? Hold on, let's make sure. Okay, look at that, how exciting. Okay, what is the project? What's the point? I mean, is it just about explaining what structural racism is to people? I mean, in part, that's a really ongoing job. That's a job that apparently is sort of like explaining things that never can be explained somehow. It's always really surprising that it's going on. So it is about describing it, but really it's about intending to produce at some point in the future, which has not yet been designed, a very visually engaging, video-based web project explaining, describing it, and working to recruit people to feel a level of emotional attachment to the urgency around ending it. Right? So the problem that I want to get at today isn't just knowing about structural racism. I mean, for goodness sake, I took structural racism courses, they weren't called that, but that's what they were, at Yale in the 1980s. This is not new information, in a sense. There's new formations, but it's not new. The question is, what are the impediments that make it so, make us as a society as a whole unable to really turn the corner and confront it and gather around changing it? So it's a visual and cultural and emotional project that's designed to expand public knowledge, but also to build an anti-racist community in the broadest sense, armed to work against it. But structural racism is a very difficult topic to talk about. A lot of research on social problems are difficult. This isn't the only one. They're daunting. I was watching some video on climate change and thought, God, I thought racism was bad. You know, I was like, we're in trouble. Note to self. You know, if we get this one solved, we got like 6 more weeks before the polar ice cap is gone, you know. Be like, well, you know, we fixed it just in time. But structural racism is particularly difficult to talk about. We've all contributed to global warming, but it doesn't quite feel as identity-based. There aren't too many of us saying, yeah, I'm really proud of, you know, contributing to global warming. You know, that's not common in our personal identities. But when it comes to questions of race, questions of history, questions of power, questions of privilege, and the notion of belonging, race and racism really stand at the heart of many of our understandings. And that makes it much more complicated when ideas that challenge either conscious or unconscious values come into play. So it makes it harder to build investment and collaboration to work against structural racism, and it's emotionally challenging for everyone. It's different and challenging for different reasons, and we often would make an easy assumption perhaps that, you know, some racial groups have one kind of emotional challenge and others have others. But I've had fascinating conversations, particularly with young people over the years, who sometimes will tell me, you know, I don't want to hear about this structural racism. You know, you students of color will say, I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to know about it. It's just going to get in my way, right? And then you would expect this is going to empower you. You'll know what the impediments are. That was how I approached it. For me, it was like lightning. I was like, oh, why didn't somebody tell me this in the 5th grade? You know, that was my response. But that's not everyone's response. So it's a very emotionally challenging topic, and that's part of the purpose of the format of the video. But it's also going to require that we all do our best to kind of stay in our best lane as we grapple with it. Right? There's a certain kind of emotional work we have to do as we listen and as we engage. So there's an extensive body of research that makes quite clear that there's extraordinary racial disparity today, and it's everywhere. In fact, when I had the 3-hour, unedited, completely confused version of this talk operating not that long ago, I won't use my watch to show how long that was, it was just staggering to think about all of the axes that one could present. So I had, 15 slides, all of which are cut now, which we can talk about later, that were just sort of breaking it down in every possible sphere, as if like the data was going to somehow prove the point. But if you need evidence, you call me. But for now, suffice to say, every aspect of life, jobs, employment, wealth, discrimination in education, criminal justice, media, housing, health, mental health, insurance agencies, loans, banking, every aspect of life that we can think about has significant forms of elements of structural racism, or shall we say evidence of racial disparity that's operating. There's virtually no place where it's not operating. Very good.
All right. So what I'd like to do is just open the floor to hear from people what your initial response, reaction, thoughts are about this. You know, we're not coming to any kind of great conclusion within this meeting, but it's an opportunity for us to begin to wrestle with some of these concepts, get to know each other, and begin to walk in this territory, begin to develop some skills in talking, about talking in this territory. So if someone would weigh in, and I'm gonna stop.
Yeah, I'll start, Jimmy.
Thank you, Chad.
Yeah, I think, I think it's, for people who join this group, I'm expecting this probably will not be new news. I think that, you know, for me, I feel very, very aware of all the reasons, some large, some small, that this exists. And I feel like the one thing that this group's gonna potentially have a challenge in is that people who may not have the same views we have when presenting with a video like that are very quickly gonna be like, that's bunk, pull yourself up, you know, I did it, my grandpa did it, I was poor. There's so many reasons for people to not see that is true just by us saying it or even showing it. And like, I tell a story sometimes about a really good friend of mine who, you know, we were in the same town, and she's like, you got to go to this place over here. He's the best guy ever. You get the best service. He's so great. She happened to be white. And the guy, I went in there, I was like, I got a really bad vibe from him. She's like, no, it must be you. You know, I know that guy for 30 years. That guy's great. It wasn't here in El Segundo, by the way. And I was like, yeah, that's not the vibe I got. And so like about 4 months later, she's like, I started asking around because that's so weird. And like, that guy's actually racist. I'm like, yeah, I knew that in the first 7 minutes in his store. And like, but again, for people, you know, she's a perfect example. Well, she knew someone for 30 years, friend of the family's, it doesn't come up. It's not that always that someone is like just willfully, that doesn't exist. There are some people that really don't see it. You know what I mean? They just have never been in a situation where they put their best foot forward and the door gets shut. You know what I mean? For some of us who may have been in that situation a bunch of times, I think the problem sometimes stems from we actually believe, especially when we're younger, like, man, I'm just not as good as that next guy. Man, I really thought I did better. I thought this would have been easier. I thought I would have at least gotten one of these spots, you know? And I think that, you know, sometimes it's seeing that this is real is important before you can have that dialogue with people about what exactly it is and how it may, you know, how they may even be perpetuating it, et cetera. So I think it's a very complicated situation.
Thank you so much, Chad. Not only is it difficult for people conceptually, but the people have very different experiences of human beings. And so that is also one of the major difficulties in being able to discuss this. Thank you for pointing that out. Anyone else?
I was going to add to Shad's point, on top of like the part of being able to see structural racism is the education around it. So what she was saying about learning about it so you can address the impediment, I think is personally really important. So like what she's saying about insurance companies and the large studies that they've shown, when you control for FICO scores, like cities with higher populations of minorities tend to have higher interest rates. And like seeing how structural racism plays out through like the data and education so you can address it. I think conversely, it's like understanding and learning about what's working. So I saw in Avery's application, he talked about how his company has been able to expand diversity and has like, because of that, has raised their revenues. So it's like learning about what they did, how that worked, like Scott was saying, like how can like our city steal with pride, like what worked within their company? How can other companies within El Segundo steal those types of learnings of what's working? I just think like the data points and education about what's working, what's not, what's like influencing these things is really important.
Thank you, Lauren. And so that's an important part of our work ahead of us. Our homework is collecting the data, having data that points out things like difference rates for interest rates in a certain population, So thank you for being able to see that. Yeah, really appreciate that.
Are we taking more discussion?
Yeah.
I think too, when I obviously grew up with a mother-in-law and a mother that talked about this, so this always felt very natural for me. But what I found since moving here, and I think the only reason I say this now that ties in with the video is I feel like we almost have to back up before we even get into that in this town, because right now it feels like before we can even have those discussions, we need to show that it's not either or here. That feels like what is a really big problem, that it's like you either like Black people or you like police, but you can't like both. And they both can't. So one structure has to come down for the other structure to be built up, right? So it feels like I almost want to back up a little bit before we even get into trying to explain to people what the structural racism is like, what the historic data shows that has been done to Black people, and say, wait, before we do that, can we agree that both of these things can be good together? Like we can dismantle something that's not working, but not dismantle the good parts about the police. So I just would love to have a discussion about that and how we talk about it, because there's so much fear in this town that things are going to change, and that if this committee makes moves, it means that we're hurting the police, and none of us want that. And Chief Whalen knows that. I mean, I love the police. I mean, there's nothing I love better than being able to call and they were here in 2 seconds. But I feel like if we get too academic too quickly with this town, or if we try to shed too much light too fast on really historic things, we might lose them. So I just would like to brainstorm, how do we start this conversation in this committee with a sense that the community knows we love our police officers, we love our police force, we love this town, and we love Black people, and we have work to do. And then we start to say, this is how we got here.
Wonderful, Kelsey, and I hear that for one of the major things you want to get beyond is this either or push and pull between any two groups. And I agree with you that there's only so fast and so far it'll go for you to disseminate certain types of information and education in the community. But it's really useful for this community, for this committee to become well-versed in the discussions, in the various discussions about heteronormative culture, about ability versus disability, for us to become skilled at having the conversation about thinking, to have a background in history and information. And I think you're right, we must be careful about how we begin to put any of that information and communication out with the community.
No, that makes sense. So basically giving us all a baseline of education as a group, that we have the data. And then
in that process, we do the work of gelling as a team. There's a way you can think of yourself as you're all recruits, you know? We all recruited you to be on a football team, and then all of a sudden you're on the field looking at each other and like, which one is the quarterback?
Right.
Like who's the lineman? And who's the one that's gonna block the punts? Who's the one that's gonna make up the play? So there's a way we need to learn each other as we're learning about the subject.
Perfect. Makes great sense. Now I see it in a different light. That makes great sense.
Thank you. Any other comments about that video?
Jimmy, I know I already talked, but I have one other thought for the local economy one. I think that for big business, there's something I read not too long ago. It was a quote by Audre Lorde, who was an activist. I think she said something in the 80s, but it's along the lines of, in a profit economy, you want to drum out the different, because, to get the crew all rowing in the same direction, it's just natural. Sometimes you want less infighting, and sometimes that leads us to have people who think just like us. I think, I work at AT&T. It's a big business. The way they do work there is very simple. We're not looking for new. We're not looking for different. We're looking for, we all want more revenue, less cost, but the way we've always done it. And I think that's one of those things where it is kind of current. Like, I'm actually having these conversations with my boss and my boss's boss, and I'm going to see how far up the chain I can take it. But like, just asking a set of questions about, how is diversity valued, at the company we're at? And if so, how would we know? because again, rewards are very specifically tied to, you know, you're on the court, you're making your VP looks good, who's making his SVP looks good. You know what I mean? It's kind of like there's a culture that everyone sees, but they don't think about it as race. They just think about it as, oh, that's our culture. You fit in or you don't. And unfortunately, when you track the existing culture, you know, when you have 80% of senior leadership happens to be white male, well then, yeah, the culture just keeps continuing to sort of replicate that. So I think there are some things we can bring to people's attention gently and currently, and because like I had this conversation with my boss last week, and he's like, well, I didn't really think about some of these things related to race or related to, you know, men, women, you know what I mean? These constructs. He's like, oh, I just figured, you know, we are hiring the best person, promoting the best person, but you know, it's clearly there for some of these big businesses as well.
Thank you, Shad. Really appreciate it. All right.
Yeah, if I could just add really quick, and I agree with just about everything that was said before. And I like Jimmy's analogy about being recruits. And I think part of the reason that we were all recruited is because of our connections to the community. And in my experience, you know, when you're talking about racism to people who may not have the understanding that you have, it really boils down to trust and them being able to accept and listen. And, you know, I've gotten, many different people have come to me in the last few months and just said, Avery, I don't understand. And I think that's where the real change really begins, is those, you know, one-on-one conversations you can have. And, you know, what I tell a lot of people, because I think there's a tendency for people to want to point to something happening today in regards to racism. And I take people back. And I take people back to, you know, especially when I'm talking about Black people, slavery, Jim Crow, and all of that type of stuff. The damage from that is enough, right? There doesn't need to be anything happening today. Just look at what happened before. I always tell people my grandmother's grandmother was a slave. I mean, you're not talking about something that was, you know, 2,000 years ago when you have that connection. And I want to touch, and then shifting a little bit to, you know, and I said this to Jimmy and to the council, you know, when you're talking about racism, regardless of who it's affecting, to me, the hurt feels the same. When you're talking about racism in the Latino community, our Asian American brothers and sisters. And so we have to recognize that it impacts many different communities. And then, you know, also talking about sexism as well, right? And, you know, that's what I've learned from my company, encouraging diversity and seeing the explosion in talent is really come from women. And I'd argue this latest economic expansion was driven on the backs of women and minorities. And so I think there's a lot of different ways we can attack this issue. And I just don't want us to have tunnel vision, even though, you know, I'm Black, but I don't want us to have tunnel vision, right? And just look at one specific thing over another.
Wonderful, Avery. You mentioned the women's issue. I have a friend who often talks about, he's always trying to see how long is it going to take for any major shift? And he often talks about the suffragette movement. And he goes, is it 70 or 80 years? You know, that started, and it took about 70, 80 years before women got the vote. And he says, that's their wives, their moms, and their aunts and sisters, and it still took that long. And so one of the things that really stood out to me in hearing Patricia Rose speak was she asked, why would we teach any of this stuff? What's the purpose? Well, it's not just education. We want to teach it in such a way that people have an emotional attachment such that you see, such that it calls out the compassion, the human compassion in you to see it as urgent. And so Dr. Joy DeGruy, she often talks about parts of our society that has been trained over generations to not feel empathy for other groups, that we've lost contact with that part of our humanity. So some of this work has to do with re-enlivening a kind of compassion that we're born with, that we want to make available for every member of society. Every member. Any other comments about that clip? We have one more to show, but any more comments about the first one? All right. Jackie, would you do us the favor of showing the second clip? Thank you.
So this makes it overwhelming, makes it large, makes it significant. Now, what we make of these numbers, we'll talk about in a minute. But this topic is also difficult for reasons that do not come into main view too much these days, which is that there's been a pretty explicit ideological war over the past 40 years between the story of structural racism and the emergent and now dominant story of colorblindness. And the war between these two stories is at the heart of the project that I want us to talk about tonight, but also the project I'm hoping to work on. So these two stories, the story of structural racism and the story of colorblindness, have been the primary explanations and frameworks that determine our public and, frankly, a lot of our scholarly analysis for, since the end of the soft end of what we call the civil rights movement. So let's start with just some basic definitions. There's lots of them in the world, but this is a composite. Structural racism in the U.S. is the normalization and legitimization of an array of dynamics, historical, cultural, institutional, and interpersonal, that routinely advantage whites while producing cumulative and chronic adverse outcomes for people of color. That's the general operative definition of structural racism. Colorblindness, or I'm calling it colorblind ideology, it makes the argument that only the absence of accounting for race will bring racial equality, and that we must reject all racial categorizations, record keeping, make no distinctions based on race in order to reach a colorblind context for a fair, equal society. So it fundamentally relies on the idea that race is not operating now and that we must keep it that way by being colorblind. Now, I could spend a whole 45 minutes on how we got this colorblindness exactly, what the easy mechanisms were, the kind of manipulation of King's very famous phrase, content of character, not color of skin. He didn't say anything about being blind. I know he's rolling over in his grave about that phrase. Like, I should have changed it. Who could know? But colorblindness is extremely resistant to illuminating any categories of race and therefore any measurements, which makes, of course, the whole structural racism argument completely antithetical to colorblind ideology. But it also assumes, in addition to that race doesn't matter now, it also means that we have to assume racial hierarchies are not already operating, that society is fundamentally fair if it's left alone to its own devices. That's the fundamental logic of colorblindness, that by simply ending the ability to see color, which has always fascinated me as a strangely depressing, sort of self-punishing idea, but that's, I'm like, I like it. But it means that, in fact, that if we leave society on its own, it will correct and produce a just circumstance. But since systemic forms of discrimination are widespread, colorblind ideology actually hides them. It has to work all the time to get rid of them, to marginalize them, to make them look minimal or off the beaten path or not central and not systemic in any major way. It also rejects policies that are designed, and this is very important because colorblind ideology has been at the heart of the ending of any kinds of programs designed to redress a legacy of structural discrimination. So you can't solve the problem by saying anything that looks like affirmative action in any sphere becomes extremely problematic in the context of colorblind ideology. And the Supreme Court's been, very significant in ending, transforming, forcing dramatic curtailments of a variety of efforts to try to remedy even past discrimination. I'm not even talking about newfangled present-day versions of it, just the past. So what happens with colorblind ideology is that phrases like affirmative action, instead of them being, as President Johnson intended, this idea of sort of acting affirmatively in the spirit of an equal creation, in the creation of an equal society, instead they become special privileges, and the whole language shifts entirely. And there's privileges that advantage Black and brown people, not an effort to level the playing field. And of course, there are a small number, well, maybe not that small, but not that big, so in the middle, group of whites who actually would claim they have significant disadvantages now. And the studies that show that, I need to read in much greater depth, because this one just, you know, is dumbfounding. It takes the whole thing to levels that you know, make you need a happy hour, basically. So I put it in this way, and this is how sort of everyday people can back themselves into the logic of colorblindness. And I just want to really note that before I read this and talk about it, that, you know, of course there are vicious ideologues who we could say are sort of hatred-filled, trying to destroy society, making sure that people of color are pressed down and never make it. You know, okay, they exist, unfortunately, and they're more than I'd like. But the vast majority of people who subscribe to colorblindness are not those people. It's a combination of a set of moves that produce an easy association. So this is sort of how I see it working out for the most part. People would say to themselves, well, since most people believe in racial equality, which includes myself, and since the laws have been changed to outlaw discrimination, and since I don't see color, well, we'll give you that one, so I can't be a racist, and since no special benefits are accrued to me based on whiteness, question mark, racism isn't causing these inequalities. So you end up with a kind of if-then, if-then. If all of these things are true, then I don't know what y'all problems are about, right? Because I've passed my own litmus test. So what remains left here at the end of this kind of self-check? What remains left is actually the heart of colorblind ideology in the way it gets deployed, and that's the behavior. Because colorblind ideology imagines that there are no structures impeding us, so we have a kind of individual capacity, and this must be about the behavior of those who are being discriminated against. They must either bring it upon themselves or be uninterested, and they have imputed cultural limitations that get understood as motivating their experiences with structural racism.
All right. So that's Professor Patricia Rose speaking about the kind of opposing forces of colorblind ideology and structural racism. And this is out there. She said, actually, the dominant thinking now is about colorblind ideology. You know, I've in much of my life heard about, you know, the focus on the individual. You know, you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you do your good work, keep your head down, you be polite, use good manners, do the old school rules, and, you know, and then you can point at people who've been successful. One of the points that Professor Rose makes is how people will say, well, look at you, you achieved, you. And so there's also a communication that points to this successful people in any group that seems marginalized. You know, there's a counter argument to and direction towards those that are successful. So, a couple of different opposing forces. This is the territory we're walking into. How did that video strike you? Let me hear from you folks.
I was just gonna say that a lot of the concept of colorblindness as a whole, I think that really reflects a lot of the ideals of some people in El Segundo, because I think some people don't understand the difference between equality and equity and how those are kind of tied with each other. And I think if we take steps with informing the public about the difference in the benefits of equity and how that will eventually lead to equality, I think a lot of people would actually be a lot more receptive to this group and would actually be really willing to work with and actually learn from this, because I think a lot of people do feel like this group is catering to minorities. Like somehow making some other people feel as if their values are being attacked or infringed upon. So I think it's really important that we consider that this topic of colorblindness is really prevalent within El Segundo, and that we try to take measures to kind of tackle this.
So well said. Thank you, Natasha. For one, I do think that that's one of our jobs ahead of us, is to have the city see that this isn't catering to one particular group. It's looking to respond to the whole community. And I think there is some real education to be put out there. And that's one of the most significant distinctions to make, the difference between equity and the state of equality. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I know I already talked a bunch, but yeah, I think something else about the colorblind conversation. I think we all have probably at some point had an awkward conversation, because racism is a difficult conversation, regardless of where you stand politically or what your ethnicity is or your race. You know, I think it's hard for a lot of people. And, you know, I think people don't want that conversation. And I know people who are very, very nice people, but at the same time, they'd rather shut down conversations about race because it is uncomfortable. And I think that's going to be another tricky part as we start having this conversation with the community. You know, there's a concept that, you know, racists are, you know, Klan members, you know, and coming for you in the middle of the night. And like, I think the concept of racist ideas or racist thoughts, maybe subliminal racist thoughts, maybe just quite, right under your radar. I think that is way more prevalent in the people that we talk to every day on the street. And so, you know, I've heard conversations before, people are like, I know I'm not racist. My husband's not racist. My family's not racist. And I don't know racist people. So I don't know, like it sort of backs them up against the colorblind thing and allows them to say, is someone who is looking to talk about race, are they making something up, or are they making something where there's nothing? And I think that's just another really tricky part of it, is that it's uncomfortable. And so it's easier for a lot of people to not have a confrontation by taking the colorblind route. You know what I mean? Like if we don't talk about it, we don't look at it, you don't try and point out something that I haven't seen, maybe it just goes away. And I think that's also, I think we're going to all have to have a comfort level where we can talk to people who feel very, very differently about us, of the reality of race, and people who may feel exactly opposite of us about race. And like, I think we're just gonna have to keep our heads cool and take them for where they're at. Like, I understand how you feel. I'm getting a little bit triggered, but you know, let's just have this conversation, you know, not emotionally, but just sort of have the conversation. I think that, you know, folks who are looking to make it colorblind sometimes just don't want to have a hard conversation.
Shad, thank you so much. Part of our duty will be to be able to take the measure of another person's view in and still stay engaged, right? I believe that part of what's ahead of us is to figure out a gentle way to enter into some of those conversations and to be skillful at acknowledging another person's point of view, not just making your point, but saying back to a person what you heard them say, acknowledging the way they see it. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something really quick and kind of expand on what Shad had to say. I think one of the things that I try to have as a goal when I'm speaking to someone about racism, about this topic, is, you know, racism works more in a spectrum than it is as a binary, oh, you're racist or you're not. And I think it's really important for people to try to understand that, you know, it's not that either you're carrying, you know, a pitchfork or, you know, you're an active anti-racist. I think people, you know, it's educating people, and to what Jimmy said, is meeting people where they're at. I really enjoyed this video because I think that, you know, for one, I think Martin Luther King is the most misquoted individual ever in American history, and you see it so much today. So I really enjoyed her making that point. And you know, when it comes to people that are colorblind, my experience has been people are colorblind by the individual, not by the group. And so I think many of us have had that conversation. Oh, you know, I don't even see you as being Black. And I've heard that many times, right? But they probably wouldn't say that somewhere else to someone else, right? And so it's all about, again, meeting people where they're at, listening to people and taking in what they're saying, but understanding what colorblind really means and where that person fits on the, I would call it the racism spectrum.
Thank you, Avery. And following up on what Shad pointed out is it kind of illustrates the thing becomes so big that it's difficult to talk about. And people defend against being pegged by a certain name rather than being able to talk about thoughts or certain practices. Another thing I wanted to remember that you made me think of, Shad, is part of our challenge is how to have this discussion and have people still see themselves as a good person. So when that becomes the fulcrum, it becomes impossible. That if I have to give up being a good person, you know, Patricia Rose spoke about how much this has to do with identity. If I have to give up being a good person to acknowledge that this happens in the world, then I'm not going to acknowledge these things, you know? So part of our challenge is, as Shad helped us to look at, is the person doesn't have to give up the identity of who they are and take on this giant thing for us to talk about this issue in a small way. Anyone else? Christina?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay, hi, hi everyone, this is me. You know, I really appreciate this committee, and I know we were going in and out in the introduction, but I am a first generation Mexican-American Latinx woman, and, you know, watching these videos and hearing and just what I've experienced growing up in Inglewood and being a transplant in Inglewood, coming to El Segundo in my mid-20s, you know, I have experienced adversity moving here. I'm a transplant. We moved to El Segundo because it was off of the 105 and the 405 to get to my mother-in-law's house in Paramount and my parents' house in Inglewood. And I know that even joining this committee, I had a conversation recently that someone was like, oh, I'm really excited that you're on it. But just remember why you moved here, that there's a reason why you moved here and it's not that bad. And so I took a step back because I have experienced adversity. So I had to really navigate that conversation carefully. I know this group totally gets it, right? You know, but how do you tell someone, you know, I did, you know, I have experienced adversity here and I love this city. I love this city, right? We moved here, we raised our families here, you know, but my kids have not always felt connected, and 2 out of 3 were born and raised here, right? And I've got a 10th grader and I have an 8th grader. And the fact that they still don't feel connected, I think that speaks to a lot of, you know, people, even the kids have said to my kids, well, you don't look Mexican. You don't look like most people. Or even just me having conversations with other residents that I love, like, oh, you're first generation, you don't seem like one. And I don't know sometimes how to respond to that. And so, you know, I love my color. I love being a Mexican American Latinx woman. I love that we live in a community that has, you know, yes, it's 70% Caucasian, but there's also, like, you know, or 64 to 70, but there's also, you know, 30 to 34 of all of us. And so, you know, I also understand that this committee is important because we've talked about it. I heard it from, I believe I heard it from Shad and from Avery, from other folks, about it does start with conversations, building that trust. Someone who understands who the Fajardo family is and who Christina is, they're more willing to hear my stories about adversity and trying to buy a home here and walking into nail salons and other things that I've experienced here. Again, I love the city. But my point though is, if you don't know me, it's easy to dismiss a person like me that, oh no, you're just overthinking it. No, you probably were having a bad day. I don't know if that's actually true. I'm probably one of the most friendliest people you'll ever meet. And so, you know, and I'm also an affirmative action baby. Like, you know, affirmative action ended in '96 in California. I had the opportunity to go to Loyola Marymount University. I was accepted in 1995. I appreciate every professor, every mentor that was there to mentor me and lift me up, right? To help me be engaged and not feel like I was falling through the cracks. And so, you know, and I think that that's sort of my role, or, you know, happy to serve with you all here, is that, that this is important, you know. And so the video's really struck a chord. So thank you for sharing, Jimmy, and thank you for team. Okay, I'm going on mute because I talk a lot. Bye.
Thanks, Christina. I just want to point that you made such an important point. You know, there's policies and practices and decrees and initiatives, but this is relationship work. And I'm so appreciate you pointing that out, that this has to do with trust, as Avery said earlier, and the relationships we have with people along the way. That'll be where the most work, the most important work is done. Thank you.
I have a short comment, and I think that one thing that I'm just hearing from all of this is that we really need to work in, you know, into all of these 4 different areas. Some community information, conversation dialogue components, educational components, just so that, you know, in different ways, because everybody in this town they're all at such different levels of information and experience. And that, you know, there really is opportunity there, but I think we need to build in all of this. Like, yes, there's reviewing policies and, you know, doing that kind of work, but the groundwork of the conversation and the dialogue kind of to inform that and get people on board, I think is going to be really, really important as a key component for each of these.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I second that motion. Thank you, Christy Bell. Yeah, and it's that was a very stimulating segment of that video. I agree with many of her points, but I do resent her defining what colorblind is. It doesn't come close. Are you kidding? She's defining me as colorblind the way she defined me. That's her opinion on colorblind. And I think that colorblindness does exist, but it's very offensive to lump everybody together in that. I'm sorry, it hurts me to hear that people are suffering and that people are suffering with racism. It hurts to hear me, you guys and gals, say that, and that you experience that. And am I colorblind when I look at people who are of color? No, when I look at the Iroquois Indians, my classmates and teammates I grew up with, do I look at them and say I'm colorblind? No, I can see they're Native American, red, brown skin. They're American Indians. And do I feel the pain that they have, knowing that their grandparents and all those generations before were taken away from their families at 5 years old to Pennsylvania and Tulsa and Oklahoma, and not allowed to return until they were after 16 years old? They couldn't come home. You can imagine that? That is painful. So I feel pain for those guys and gals, like I feel pain for you guys. And I want to help, but I want to make sure, like Kelsey said, that we look at the big picture. And I recommend and I urge everybody to please look and rent the Larry Elder documentary, Uncle Tom. It's, I believe, the answer to the problems in our country, much of it. It really lays it out. And I'll tell you, having gone to West Point, studied the 1860s like crazy. Oh, and the pain between those classmates and roommates that I still love, that went north-south hey, my ancestors were on the North fighting for slavery to be abolished. And praise the Lord, it was. And we're not a perfect union yet, but we're on the right way. And I think this committee can help as long as we keep it big picture and in terms of all these 4 issues and the others to come. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for helping us remember too. We want to speak about hard truths, and at the same time, we don't want to call any group of people as a monolith, right? That that we don't want to use that word lump, a whole group of people into one category, to make space for everyone to be who they are, to be seen in a humane way. So thank you for that reminder for us. Appreciate that. Anyone else? We're just about wrapping up. Any last comments before we wrap up this section? Scott?
Okay, so we're toward the end. Are there any questions about the committee, the process, logistics? No? Okay, so when we come back, to make sure I've got this right, make sure staff has this right. And by the way, we are taking minutes. You will see copies of the minutes. You'll be asked to approve the minutes to make sure we got the records or the record correct at the beginning of each meeting. So we'll come back. Oh, we didn't pick a date, did we? We need a date for our next meeting because when we come back, you'll select chair and vice chair.
Yes, we were getting there. 4 weeks from today is November 19th. It's the Thursday before Thanksgiving. So you have it's not right in the middle of the holidays. We could do 1 month from today, or if you want to meet earlier.
We try something.
Do the 2 weeks, right?
Can we try something in 2 weeks?
Can we do Wednesdays instead, possibly?
I like Wednesdays. I was going to say Wednesdays or Tuesdays would be great for me also.
That would, if that works for other people. Wednesdays seem to be better than in case people travel on Thursdays. I don't know where we'd go, maybe down the street.
Well, Wednesday, November 11th, Veterans Day.
Okay. And today. Oh, that would be wonderful if we could do that.
That may be a holiday.
I already heard the rink is we have girls lacrosse Wednesday nights, but that's all right. Coaches can run it. But I heard from the city rec already that the city's closed that day. So is there an issue?
A holiday.
Yeah,
it's a
holiday then.
Oh, we get that day off?
Oh.
How about one?
Come in and work. Glad someone told me.
That's not going to work.
All right. So do you want to try Tuesday the 10th?
Perfect.
That works.
Yeah?
Okay.
Okay, let's do that.
All right, very good.
Would it be around the same time?
Kenneth?
If it's on Tuesdays, I can't do 4 p.m. Anything before I can do, or anything after 7.
Welcome to our world.
Yes, and I have a Little League board meeting that day too, but it's at 7, so we conflict Kenneth there with our schedule.
What time can you be there, Kenneth?
Tuesday, I can do anything between 12 and 4.
Okay.
Maybe one more Thursday. Can we squeeze one more Thursday in?
The 12th, would that work? November 12th, 2 weeks from today?
Yes.
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 Okay, at 4 p.m.?
4 p.m. Okay, good.
Yep. All right.
So we'll do that. You'll have an opportunity to nominate and select a chair and a vice chair. And there'll be discussion about bylaws. Is that right? Is that what I heard earlier? Jackie Day, is that right?
Yes.
And okay. And will we get something out to the committee in advance, Jackie, that talks about bylaws?
Yes, if Barbara can provide that to me, we'll definitely get it out.
Yeah.
Barbara, I'll work with you on that too.
Okay.
Yeah,
And,
that's not a problem.
and perhaps we can get information out about a chair and a vice chair, what that typically means. Do we have that?
Well, I think I'm going to have to, I'll work with Mashia to get some sample bylaws, and David, thank you for offering. And we'll look at the language in there. I know for EDAC, there is language about the chair and his or her role. So we'll just do a scan through and make sure that there's some sample language for you all to consider.
Yeah, Barbara, we used EDAC for ACC when we did their bylaws, and there are some things with chair and co-chair with some of those bylaws.
Okay. And then on that meeting on the 12th, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just thought of something. You can go on our website in the section Commission, Committees, and Boards, and all of the CCBs are listed, and under each one, the bylaws are there. So you have access to all of those bylaws. I will send out, make sure you have a link and you know exactly where they are. But that could be a good starting point to kind of scan through them and you know, bring your thoughts on what you think should be included for this particular committee. But I'll make sure you have, you know, a link to access that directly.
Right.
Okay. And then assuming time allows us on the 12th, then we can start on the first topic. And Chief Whalen, I assume since you didn't communicate that it doesn't work for you, you'll be available on the 12th, and maybe you could do like a brief overview of the department or start the discussion if the group is willing to do that and we have time to do that.
Muted. Chief, you're muted.
That's how I hear him anyhow. I'm sorry.
Oh.
I didn't voice anything because this is really about them and not me, but I do have a conflict that afternoon, and so I might be able to jump on later. But Scott, we had talked about a more robust police department presentation around the first of the year. So you and I are going to have to sit down and figure out what we want to do, because if it's going to be a deep dive on the PD, that is taking time to put together. If it's a really superficial overview, then in an hour's time, we could do that. So maybe you and I talk offline to see what your goal is.
Okay. Or we'll come up with something, committee, because it may take you upwards of an hour to dig through the chair and the vice chair and bylaws. I mean, who knows how long that takes? And one thing I could do for you, let's say you do all that in an hour, is I can give a short overview of how the city is structured, the different departments and all of that. And so you can get a feel for how we're organized, and you can see where the police fits into all that. You know, like I can do it in a very user-friendly, non-technical, non-boring way about how the city is structured. Because what seems normal to us that we've spent decades developing our understanding might just seem almost mystic to you, right?
Yeah, Scott, I think we can do both. I think, you know, a superficial kind of overview, but then do the deep dive a little later. And thank you, Bill.
Well, yeah. Jimmy, whatever you think is best for the group.
Sounds terrific. Group, I'm just going to let you know that I've got some homework for you. In the chat, I think I've correctly copied the link, but I'm going to suggest it to you as well so that you find the article. It's a poem by Thich Nhat Hanh. It's connected to an incident that happened in Plum Village. So if the link is difficult for you, just keyword Thich Nhat Hanh and Plum Village. You'll get the article and a poem. And I think it's real important for you to read that. We'll discuss, that'll be part of our discussion when we reconvene on the 12th of November.
Oh, Jimmy, I apologize. We skipped over that agenda item. I'm sorry.
That's quite fine. Quite fine.
Okay. So are there any other questions or comments before we sign off? Not seeing any. I would like to add some parting thoughts here, and that is, in public service, diversity is a strength, and it's our greatest asset. You know, I try to promote that here, and that is the spirit of public service. So you are dealing with your local city, and we are in the people business. The services we provide are all about people, whether it's police or fire, community development, library, parks and rec, public works, internal departments. It's people business. So diversity is our greatest asset. So I just want to let you know we are aware of that and we can always do better.
All right.
With that, Jimmy.
With that, this meeting is adjourned.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.